Germany in the late 1920s. Music, theatre, cinema, cabaret. Enormous energy eaten up seeking serious pleasure. These were the years Fritz spent at sea. Not that the good times were for working class lads like him. Meanwhile, Hitler saw the nightclubs and found them shameful. He'd begun to see himself as some hero of old, his mission to slay the monster of democracy.
Our public life today encourages this wallowing in pleasure. We must clean away this filth, this plague, and we must clean it away ruthlessly and without wavering.
Hitler's problem was simply persuading Germans they needed some knight in shining armor. But then, on October the 24th, 1929, Wall Street crashed.
All right. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of The War Room, courtesy of YouTube. I am your host, Sigma Jones. This is my co-host, Logic's Finest. First and foremost, we just want to give a shout out to our subscribers. Thanks for listening in. Thanks for tuning in. We truly appreciate the love and support. Hope you all are doing well here in America and those who are listening in from across the world or any other place in the world. So tonight we are still delving into the life of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party during the 1920s. And so this is part 3 of this ongoing series as we continue on in the 1920s overall during the pre-years of World War II. But before we get started, let me first introduce my co-host, the man who definitely has no problems telling the truth when it needs to be told, and that is Mr. Logic's Finest. Good sir, how you doing this morning?
I'm good. How are you?
Not too bad, sir. Not too bad. Hopefully you had a good break with your loved ones and any endeavors you're doing with your business and everything. Hope all is well.
Man, it has been nonstop. I mean, I flew into London for one day, maybe 18 hours. Flew in, hotel, showered, meetings, lunch, right to Heathrow, plane, back across the pond in New York. Meetings, business. Going to be here about till the end of the month and then back home to Germany to start the month. So it's just been one thing after the other, just nonstop. Crazy.
Well, hopefully you are doing better, sir, because, hey, business as usual, as you like to put it, it's just part of that life.
Man, see, the thing for me, right? Business is like a dragon that I have to slay every single day. So it drives me, it pushes me, it motivates me. Some good, some bad, but definitely has its benefits.
That is true. And that's one of the things that I think we try to emphasize even on the War Room as far as like the business aspect of, the things we have going on behind the scenes and even during the show. Even though we love teaching about history and especially World War II history, this is also considered part of business too. In fact, I know Veterans Day just recently passed on this week, but pretty much I spent all of Veterans Day transferring all of these streams from the previous channel of the War Room content over to this new channel. So for those who will be tuning in and this is your first time watching the stream and you're still kind of not too for sure where to begin, all of the content from episodes 1 up until now are definitely on this channel. We have a playlist for this particular series. So as they say, business as usual.
Business as usual.
All right. So before we get started, just want to kind of recap a little bit from the last stream. So we talked a little bit about how Hitler was starting to mold this new party into his own image, at least to his likeness. And the last part we left off of was the swastika. And I told the audience that I was going to give them a little bit of a homework assignment. And even though we don't have anybody in the chat room at the moment, still no problem because you can always come back during the replay. So I do have these symbols up, and I'm actually going to start sharing them now. And we're going to see what is the main difference between the swastika signs, because they're similar, but it was how they were informed and interpreted. And so let me bring it up here. Here we go. Okay, so these are these are two signs. One of them is the Nazi swastika, and the other is actually a sign that relates to Buddhism. And so, for those that's going to be listening in on the replay, just look at these symbols and ask yourself, can you actually tell the difference between the two?
It's very funny because an in-depth study of Adolf Hitler, you also have to look at some of the sources for material that he looked at. One of them being Buddhism, Sanskrit, Hinduism, and a lot of esoteric sources. He was a huge reader of Madame Blavatsky and several others. So he had his hand in many different pots that a lot of people may not even be aware of. So, as you and I have talked, history is written by the victors. So it's always been painted that he was this inhuman monster. Now, we are not here to say that he was a model citizen, but there is so much more to this man than has been the public image that has been put forth. There is so much more complexity and intricacy and layers. But let's just jump right into it.
Absolutely. And so, and I'm glad you brought that up as far as Hitler's interest in the esoteric thinkings and everything, because that's where he got the inspiration for the swastika, was looking at the studies of Buddhism and Hinduism. And it's one of the reasons that later on we'll find out that his relations to Japan was actually very strong than what people even realize. Oh, go ahead, sir.
No, I was just going to say that the symbol on the left, is the Buddhist symbol, Sanskrit symbol. I mean, it's literally thousands of years old. Most people on the planet were unaware of this symbol.
Right.
But now everyone on the planet, as soon as they see that the one on the right, they immediately know Nazi Germany. It's been burned into the global consciousness. So that's something to think about. Social engineering and who writes your history. And is the history that's written, even when based on historical facts, is it accurate? Just because it's in books and taught in schools doesn't make it accurate. But I digress.
Oh no, so you're absolutely right. And before we continue, so as my co-host rightfully pointed out, yes, the symbol on the left is for Buddhism, and the symbol on the right is actually the symbol that the Nazis have used for the swastika. But did you know that there's even a slight difference even for the symbol on the right? And this is where I'm going to show that difference. So let me bring up the next image. Now, this is where things get even more interesting
Mm-hmm.
because the image on the left is actually the global symbol of Hinduism. This was the symbol that they used to signify their temples and their locations of worship. So, I guess you could say the ingenious of the Nazi Party and their play on words and symbols, as my co-host just said, all they simply did was take the original swastika from the Hindus and literally just tilt it forward, just slightly.
Because
And that shows you the difference of imagery and the importance imagery play on people's minds.
exactly, and we see that playing out right now. Adolf Hitler understood the power of symbolism.
Mm-hmm.
He absolutely understood that power of symbolism. And if you look at Edmund Bernays, the man who literally created advertising, he based it on the work of his uncle, Sigmund Freud. The
Mm-hmm.
use of symbolism, the use of imagery. So it's when you appeal to certain base human emotions, you elicit a certain response. So what are we seeing now playing out? We are seeing in 2021, we are seeing Pavlov's for the first time in a long time in history, social engineering taking place in real time. Mm. Because social
Absolutely.
engineering is measured in decades. It's measured in 10-year blocks. But over
Mm-hmm.
18 to 20 months, we're seeing social engineering happen in real time. I've been seeing it and I've been consistently seeing this in March of 2020 has to be an anthropologist dream because you're seeing social engineering happen in real time.
Absolutely. And this is one of the reasons why I wanted to bring this exercise because, as you rightfully pointed out, today would be an anthropologist's dream as far as how imagery, how uh, 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 markers and slogans have just changed the human psyche overnight. As you said, it usually takes about 10 years for symbols to kind of be engraved or slogans be engraved in the human psyche. Whereas today we are seeing slogans and symbols being ingrained at like almost light speed. And so the key emphasis I wanted to point out though is the fact that this is definitely not something new. Because sometimes I hear people talk about, wow, this symbol or that symbol is really catching on, and I've never seen anything like this. And it's like, no, no, no. Slogans, symbols, and other types of markers have been trademarked in the human psyche for years. You're just now noticing how quick and almost easy these type of things are getting trapped into the human psyche.
You know, to further dig deeper into that, a lot of people keep asking the question, how the hell did Germany get to the point where a man like Adolf Hitler could rise to power? Well, you and I have talked about the situations that a nation has to go through in order for the strong man to come forth and take power. And the people will literally clamor for the strong man to take power. The reason why I'm mentioning this, the day that I touched down in New York City, I was watching a news report and they were saying that the FDA was about to approve I want to say Johnson & Johnson, don't quote me, one of the drug companies for a vaccine for a certain situation that's happening globally,
Mm-hmm.
approve it for children. And they were waiting, pending, hopeful for FDA approval to roll it out for children.
Mm.
And everyone was waiting. They don't know what's going on with the FDA, whether they're going to give approval. But then they threw a little line at the end that everybody glossed over. They said that once the FDA gives its seal of approval, children can have the vaccines fully vaccinated in the New York City Board of Ed the next day.
Mm.
Think about that.
Red flag.
That means that the plan was already put in motion. It's all
Mm-hmm.
public theater. Again, this is something that we always talk about, because how do you on the one hand say that you're hoping for FDA approval, you don't know what's going to happen, but yet you're ready to, in under 24 hours, have every child and student in the largest public education system on the planet vaccinated the next day.
Right. Just mass distribution, like as soon as the green light is given, hitting the
Like that.
ground running.
Now, now, mind you, the New York City Board of Ed, the largest Board of Ed on the planet, for
Mm-hmm.
months could not get tablets out to the students for homeschooling. Parents had to literally get their own devices or use their own devices.
Right.
So again, just little breadcrumbs that we're dropping here, because everything, most things that you see are public theater. So once you condition people to think a certain way, they will accept anything that you tell them and not think about it. And isn't
Mm-hmm.
that something that we've seen play out in every nation on this planet for the entire duration of recorded human history? So no, Nazi Germany is not unprecedented. It happens in every nation. It's a cycle that repeats itself.
Absolutely. And that was, I'm glad you brought that up as far as like Nazi Germany being a precedent of what was to come. That was one of the reasons I played that short little clip before we jumped on to kind of show what was Hitler's thinking during this segment of the 1920s and how he wanted to be the knight in shining armor to lead Germany out of its debauchery that was the Weimar Republic. And I'm thinking to myself, huh, what individuals that we are seeing playing out today that, if I recall, somehow made the slogan "Build Back America"?
Mm. What? Listen, the thing is this, right? Whether it's Build Back America, Make America Great Again, Hope, Change, No Child Left Behind, You're With Us or You're Against Us,
Mm-hmm.
1,000 Points of Light, War on Drugs. I could I can go back. I can go back decades. So again, let's let's just jump into it, because the point that I'm trying to make here is most people are so caught up in the binary thinking, and there's my side or your side. You're either with us or you're against us. So once you lock yourself into binary thinking, you're no longer thinking. You are reacting. You are exhibiting a pre-programmed response to a predetermined stimuli.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the human version of the Pavlov experiment. You think you're thinking, but you've been programmed to react, and that's all that you're doing. you are reacting. And binary thinking is the hallmark of a closed mind, and a closed mind cannot open doors.
Exactly. Well, with that said, let's go ahead and get right into the next chapters that we're reading in the book called Adolf Hitler, the Definitive Biography. I did tag the book from Barnes and Nobles into the chat, so for those who would like to do their own reading and their own research, the information to the ebook or the hard copy is definitely in the chat. So let's go ahead and get right into it. So we last left off towards the end of section 2. We're now going into section 3. And so section 3 starts off by saying, the Kapp-Putsch and the annihilation of communist regimes in central Germany had left the cause of socialism in disarray. Ebert and his majority socialists had widened the breach between themselves and the left-wing independent socialists by the opportunistic use of Free Corps units against the workers of the Ruhr. In early autumn of 1920, the descendants, who themselves were divided almost equally between pro-communists and anti-communists, met for 5 days in Hull to determine the future course of the Independent Socialist Party and its relationship to the Third International. The most inspiring speaker at the Congress, Grigory Zinoviev, president of the Third International, came from Moscow. The Soviets had sent him to swing the almost 900,000 German socialists to the far left. He spoke for hours in a somewhat broken German, which only heightened the effects of his talk. It was received tumultuously by the pro-communists. Bitter debates between right and left ensued, and some observers felt the former had the better argument. But the idea of world revolution was too exhilarating to resist. 237 voted to join the Third International under the conditions laid down by Lenin. 156 voted no, and then walked out of the hall in a body. But of those who remained, most became communists. One delegate who left the hall, alarmed as well as disillusioned, was Otto Strasser. He listened to Zinoviev with mounting annoyance and concern. What he said sounded like a new Messiah doctrine, with Moscow dominating Germany. Strasser and an older brother, Grigor, had long followed the socialist dream. Both were prepared to face drastic reforms, but not those directed by a foreign power. What they sought was a German-oriented socialism, and Otto had thought he would find it among the revolutionary independent socialists. So far what we're seeing here is the development of left-wing politics, or you could say left-wing parties. Just as the Nazi Party at this time is slowly building up its regime and slowly starting to develop its own political power, you also have the far left that were starting to garner more attention too. And even amongst them, they had some detractors. As we saw here with Otto Strasser, he was like, I'm on board with socialism, but to be run by another country, especially Moscow and the Soviets, I'm not on board with that.
Yeah, because one of the things, one of the major differences between European countries and America has a two-party system. So Americans can only seem to wrap their heads around a two-party system because that's all that Americans know. My way, your way, my way is right, your way is wrong, and that's it. There's only two options. So countries in Europe, countries have multiple parties. 4, 5, 7, 10 different parties, and they're all at any one time vying for power. And it's not always a winner take all. It's actually rarely a winner take all. It's
Hmm.
coalitions. So you will have parties that can be diametrically opposed on certain issues, but they see eye to eye on some issues. So it always makes for strange bedfellows.
Right. And let's not forget to remind the audience when we talked about the Weimar Republic early on before diving into Hitler's background
Hmm.
into the 20s, you got to remember the Weimar Republic, there was not one party that won the majority.
Right.
They had no choice but to collaborate with their
Hmm.
opposition just so they can win the seats.
Co- Coalition governments, right?
And that in and of itself can show the instability of a nation, because if you have a party that has to rely on coalitions with other parties just to get the majority seat, well, when it comes down to the more important things like, say, policies and infrastructure, well, that's where you're going to see splits between the majority, because now you have a coalition. They One party wants something different when it comes to policies and infrastructure versus the other party. And when you're in that predicament, you know, governments are not able to be run properly when there's a lot of coalitions.
Exactly. I mean, at the end of the day, there has to be some sort of unifying voice, a unifying vision, if nothing else. You know, that all parties involved can gather around. There has to be, you know, we collectively agree on these things. So we're going to move in this direction. We may not agree on some things here, but we all agree there are certain core fundamental issues that we agree these are the core fundamental issues. Now we disagree on how best to go about solving them, but we
Hmm.
both agree this is where the thrust of the focus has to be. So when I look at America, in current terms, uh, America to me seems to be going down the same exact path as the Weimar Republic, because
Hmm.
look, infrastructure has been ignored, economy and the finance has been ignored, um, joblessness has been ignored. So what does that situation remind you of? The Weimar Republic. And everywhere you turn, you see the same exact thing as the end days of the Weimar Republic. Live your life, express yourself, be who you want, say what you want. Nothing matters. There are there are no limits or standards on common decency and interpersonal relationships. Everything's wide open. Express yourself who you want to be. And it led to social degradation on top of the underlying fundamentals, not taking care of the economy, taking care of the people and the infrastructure. So, what happened? As history has proven, that set the stage for the strongman.
Yep. And this is where, as children of history,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm pretty sure, sir, you've probably thought along this lines as well. Sometimes I look at the current conditions of America and I ask myself, is it possible for another Hitler? And it may not have to be like a white ring Hitler. He could also be a left wing.
Mm-hmm.
But are the conditions slowly building up, as you pointed out, rightfully pointed out, for another Hitler to literally repeat history?
Personally, at this current stage, personally, I'm leaning towards no,
Hmm.
because the economy has not collapsed. Hyperinflation has not taken hold. Um, Joblessness is not rampant. You don't have 40, 50, 60, 70% of the total population jobless. You don't have rampant homelessness, despite what you see with certain cities.
Mm-hmm.
Those are certain, those are literally one or two pockets of a few cities. So I don't see the same conditions for that to happen, and society has not collapsed. It is clearly on that path, which is why I keep saying it. But I don't see a mirror of all the same conditions that Germany was in 1929.
Absolutely, and I'm also in agreement with that too. I definitely believe when you look at the American infrastructure versus the Weimar republics, America is definitely much more sturdier, and definitely thanks in part to the Great Depression and the stock market crashing, which we're definitely going to delve into later on in the series. That kind of helped to. There were people that learned from that, as far as like in government, American government, and they took strong measures to make sure that at least something that major wouldn't be more catastrophic. So I'm with you in regards into that. That yeah, um, right now we're not in that position just yet where the entire nation is pretty much almost an anarchy, and is just waiting for that tipping scale to let the floodgates open. But we are definitely seeing slow but sure progressions of America going into the latter stages of the Weimar Republic.
Yeah, exactly. I couldn't agree more. And also, for me, I'm still seeing America in some ways. It's not unprecedented because there's nothing new under the sun. So America is the de facto global powerhouse nation, the leader of the planet, as it were. But we do see the rise of China, and unbeknownst to even most people, Germany is one of the three most powerful economies on the planet. Germany is the economic power for all of Europe, which makes it the de facto power of Europe. But I
Mm-hmm.
digress. So also, um, I want to say, and it sounds like a cop out, but times have changed. Technology has changed.
Mm-hmm.
America still has the ability, somewhat, to exercise some control over the value of its own currency. And America, despite a lot of public theater and smoke, it's
Mm-hmm.
still the most powerful military. With all due respect to China, and even with when I say the smoke, at the end of the day, there's too many variables. I just don't see America's at that tipping point quite yet. But again, time will tell. But at this point currently, I don't see America quite there yet.
Agreed. I definitely agree on that as well. So the next paragraphs says that after Hall, he was a man without a party. Disgusted, and this is talking about Otto Strasser, he journeyed to Landshut to consult his brother, who had organized a free corps type private army of his own, with infantry and artillery batteries, and a machine gun company. Gregor admitted that nothing was more dangerous than the Russians, and that there wasn't a single political party that could successfully oppose them. Quote, nothing can be done with talking, he said. Only action. Two important guests, he said, were coming to discuss the problem. The next morning, according to Otto Strasser's account, a large car drew up in front of his brother's chemist shop. Two men stepped out. Otto recognized the first, General Ludendorff, a hero to all nationalists. Behind, at a respectful distance, like a battalion orderly, was a pale-faced young man with a stubby mustache, clad in an ill-fitting blue suit. It was Hitler. "We must unite all nationalist groups," announced the general. The political training was up to Herr Hitler. Ludendorff himself would take over the military leadership of these nationalist organizations. He asked Gregor to subordinate himself and his storm battalions under my military leadership, and also to join Herr Hitler's party. Otto was not at all impressed with Hitler, although he promised to make Gregor the first national Gauleiter party district leader, and give him the Gaul of Lower Bavaria. The younger Strasser interrupted. What, he asked, was the NSDAP program? "The program isn't a question," said Hitler. "The only question was power." Otto objected. Power was only the means of accomplishing the program. "These are the opinions of the intellectuals," said Hitler curtly. "We need power." It was obvious he did not like Otto, and a moment later he accused him of fighting with the Reds against the Cap regime. Now, excuse me, what I find interesting, especially in that last paragraph, where Hitler says the only question was power. We need power, and that when Otto rejected, he said, "These are the opinions of the intellectuals." And for those who have kind of been reading up more, watching our series about Hitler's background, we all know that Hitler definitely wasn't, I would say, he wasn't a bookworm, although he did look into esoteric thinking and all. But he most certainly was not a bookworm. Far from it, especially from his educational side. But we all know that what really was bringing Hitler people to his side was the fact that he knew how to convey the right words at the right time. And I find it interesting that in this particular section, this particular paragraph, that when he talks about we need power, he was absolutely right.
Yeah, the funny thing is, right, so Otto is basically calling Hitler out. He's saying that, well, hey, man, you really don't have a program. You're just whipping up the masses to follow you and follow your party. But what of any substance are you talking about? And Hitler's basic response was, don't question me. If you question me, you must be against the people.
Mm-hmm.
Now, funny enough, Otto was right to question Hitler because Hitler was not the brightest bulb on the tree. He was very well read, but he was not intelligent, and there was a difference. There's a huge difference. So he was absolutely right to call Hitler out, and Hitler, for the guy that he is, realizes that, oh, no, I definitely cannot have, because when you are a politician and you're the type of person who basically is a fast-talking hustler, the last thing you want anywhere near you for people to hear speaking are intellectuals, because they're going to call you out on your BS.
Right. Exactly. And keep in mind, folks, intellectuals does not mean being college educated. Just want to point that out too, because unfortunately, especially in today's environment, you have people that would love to talk that paper, I would say, of a college degree, say, see, I got this degree, therefore I'm an intellectual. And it's like, no. That paper just only proves you're able to follow instructions and orders. Does not mean you are actually intelligent to think on your own.
there are plenty of educated fools, plenty of them. So just to, just to say, to hold up a piece of paper in and of itself as some proof of your ability to think critically is an absurd proposition. What do you have to actually say? Open your mouth and start speaking and start presenting clear, coherent, cogent ideas. That's how you prove something about yourself. But again, let's just move right along.
Yes, sir, indeed. Excuse me. Next, it says Otto retorted with his own accusation. How could someone calling himself a National Socialist support a reactionary like Cap? He explained that he had fought as a socialist in Berlin just as he had earlier marched in Munich against the Soviet regime. Each course seemed to be the right one. He was truly a National Socialist. Ludendorff interrupted. The politics of the nationalist opposition can't be communistic, he said. But it also can't be capitalistic. When he was a quartermaster general, he had fewer problems with workers than with capitalists. This surprising statement cleared the air, and the meeting ended amicably, but without a definite decision for the elder Strasser. He wanted to think over the proposition. That evening, Gregor told his brother that he had made up his mind to join forces with Ludendorff and Hitler, even though he also had not been too impressed with the latter. The general will use him in the right place, he said. I trust Ludendorff in this regard. Hitler's refusal to reveal his political program to Otto Strasser was not because he had none or could not express it, but probably because he was too stubborn to discuss it with a, quote, traitor who had fought against the Cap forces. Moreover, Hitler had come to win over Gregor and his battalions, and he had the definite feeling at parting that both would eventually be in his camp. Gregor Strasser was his kind of man, a frontline junior officer who, like himself, had won the Iron Cross, first class. He was obviously a man of conviction, an ardent nationalist, opposed to both Marxism and capitalism, who recognized that the Jews were the backbone and the brains of both. The winning of Gregor Strasser was but one of Hitler's accomplishments since he had joined the Little German Workers' Party. In less than a year, he had not only transformed the character of the organization, but raised its membership to almost 3,000. All his time was devoted to the NSDAP, and he had traveled widely, making himself and the party fairly well known. He had been the main speaker at some 80 mass meetings, traveled to Berlin with Eckert during the Cap Putsch, and addressed an international congress of National Socialists at Salzburg. So here we see that Hitler was still able to somewhat win over the Strasser brothers, even though they were still not impressed by him, but they feel that Ludendorff will be the one to kind of like guide this dude in the right place at the right time. But what I find interesting is that even though Hitler is being used as a tool, he's the right tool for the right circumstances. As we can see clearly, the membership of the small German party is now definitely above 2,000.
Yeah, and the funny thing about Hitler was he was smart enough, he was just smart enough to know that he wasn't smart. So he always surrounded himself with smarter people. So there is, that's a smart thing to do. When you don't know a lot, surround yourself with smarter people than you. and then you just sit back and take the credit for all of their work. And as long as we're all moving in the same direction, they're only more, but so more than happy to give you the credit.
Mm-hmm.
You know, one of the things that really stands out to me, and it is a difficult thing to explain to people because there is a difference between Marxism, socialism, and communism.
Mm-hmm.
Karl Marx, you know, in his manifesto, Lenin had different ideas, which is why it was called Leninism. And he led the Bolshevik Revolution to overthrow the czars. And he did not want Stalin to take control of the party because he felt Stalin would move the party away from where it needed to be. Stalin did not have the best interest of the people at hand. He had the best interest of Joseph Stalin in hand. And his ideas were given the term Stalinism, and that became communism. So again, socialism has its foundation and its roots in Marxism, yes, but it is not Marxism. Communism also has its roots in Marxism, but again, it is not Marxism, and communism is not socialism. They are literally three separate things. Two of them come from the one root, being Marxism, but they are three separate things. And the point that I think a lot of people tend to gloss over is human greed, because what has brought down Stalinism and brought down communism is human greed. But that's a completely different rabbit hole that we really don't want to go into. I just want to just lightly touch on that, and then we can just circle back to it at some other time.
Right. And hold that thought just one moment.
Mhm.
Okay. Had to take care of a little something. But yeah, absolutely. And I find it interesting that before we delve back into the reading, that I hear some people that talks about how they're Marxists, they're communists, they're socialists. But when I asked them, could you explain to me why you're a Marxist,
Mhm.
communist, socialist, whatever,
Mhm.
and they really can't give me a definitive proof that will tell me, yes, this individual is a Marxist, this individual is a communist, this individual is a socialist. Like, to me, they just get the wording wrong. That when you listen to it, it's like, sounds like you're more of a socialist, even though you claim to be a Marxist, or sounds like you're more of a Marxist, even though you claim to be a communist. But
And
I just find that interesting.
yeah, me too. And that is where a lot of people trip themselves up. They really don't know. So, and it is mentally exhausting to try to explain these differences to people because they're so close minded and they don't want to open their mind. And God forbid they accept that they really don't understand what it is that they're claiming. It's not even so much that you don't know, but that you don't understand. So, people don't like to be corrected. All you do is end up making enemies. So, I just, at this point now, I tend to just leave it alone.
Indeed. I definitely with on that. So the next section, and shout out to JJ Wilson, another War Room veteran. Good to see you, sir. The next section says success on the platform had not turned Hitler's head. In fact, he would pace up and down in his little room, complaining to his personal bodyguard, Ulrich Graf, a former butcher, of his inability to go out there and tell the people what he knew and what he wanted to do. If I could only speak, if I could only speak, he used to shout. Dissatisfied not only with his delivery, but with the conduct of the mass meetings, he determinedly set about improving both. He attended rival rallies and invariably found that the main speaker delivered his address in the style of a witty newspaper article or of a scientific treatise, avoiding all strong words, and here and there threw in some feeble professional joke. Such tedious meetings taught him what not to do. He made his own lively and rousing. The atmosphere was down to earth and genial, with free beer, sausages, and pretzels, and even when party funds permitted, concertina music and folk singing. Then, at the psychological moment, Hitler himself would make a dramatic appearance with band playing and swastika banners flying. Usually he had begun quietly. Then, filling out each audience as an actor would, he adapted his manner and speech to his needs, finally rousing it to a pitch of almost uncontrollable enthusiasm. Now, before I continue, I definitely want to let the audience know that I can't wait till we get into dissecting Hitler's postures during his speeches and how he methodically go about reading the audience and really captivating the speeches, because we're seeing a small preview here that he's starting to realize that I need to read the audience and adapt to it. And anybody who is a good orator will tell you they can read the audience and perfect their speech just with the feeling of what's going on within the audience.
You know, I look at William Jefferson Clinton, Barack Hussein Obama, and Donald J. Trump. Clinton was smooth and polished, slick Willie. Barack Obama had that college professor, wise uncle. Donald J. Trump was Donald J. Trump. But all three of them, in their own way, knew how to reach people. Clinton was a brilliant orator.
Mm-hmm.
Obama wasn't, but his demeanor held your attention. Trump, definitely not a good public speaker, but he knows how to appeal to your emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And Hitler knows the very same thing. So, also, and what do all four of these men have in common? Pass the collection plate.
Yep. As we always say, if you want to know what goes on behind the scenes, follow the money.
When you follow drugs, you end up with drug dealers. But when you follow the money, there's no telling where you will end up. Follow the money. Nothing else matters. Absolutely nothing.
Indeed, indeed. And salute to Hood Conservative. Good to see you, sir. The next paragraph says, the success of the mass meetings did not satisfy Hitler. He wanted a wider forum, and for that, he needed his own newspaper. The Volksschau Beobachter was on the brink of bankruptcy because of numerous liberal actions. This was the paper Hitler wanted. A financial crisis was the opportunity he had been waiting for. At 2 a.m. on the morning of December 17th, Hitler burst into Eckert's apartment excitedly announcing that the Beobachter had to be sold because of debts and was in danger of falling into the wrong hands. A separatist leader intended buying it as a platform for his program. The party must get it instead. The asking price was reasonable, only 180,000 marks, which, as we all know, wasn't really that much back then. And Hitler was positive Eckert could raise this from wealthy friends. At 8 the next morning, Drexler was at Eckert's door. It was an unspeakable hour for a man of the latter's habits, and at first, recalled Drexler, he was bad-tempered. Then we started off. By noon, they had collected 60,000 marks from the General von Epp, whose Free Corps unit helped overthrow Munich's Soviet government in 1919, and 30,000 more from other contributors, including an anti-Semitic doctor. Drexler himself signed a note for the paper's debts of more than 100,000 marks, and at 4 that afternoon, the purchase of the Beobacher was properly registered. Now Hitler and the NSDAP, thanks primarily to an eccentric author and a toolmaker, were prepared for the next leap forward. Now, before I continue, Conservative says, if you follow the money, you end up in a bank. Definitely some truth to it, but it's not so much of the physical nature of where the money takes you. It's more of who's the leading hand in bringing that money to that location. That's what we're hinting at as far as following the money.
Because at the end of the day, it's not about it's not about left or right, because left wing or right wing, it's all the same bird. Your governments are controlled by wealthy elite. So with all of this endless useless circular arguments about this side or that side, it's political theater. It's nothing more than modern day bread and circuses. You have to follow the money to know where the true power in your nation lies. So again, that's why I do not even engage in those conversations about left or right. It's meaningless. Mm-hmm. Follow the money. Once you understand that, you begin to make better choices for yourself, because you understand the true nature of the situation in which you find yourself. And that, my friend, will set you apart to a very small amount of people. But that's a completely different rabbit hole that we most certainly do go down, but we definitely don't stray from that conversation at all.
Indeed. Well, before we continue, I want to talk about the importance of this acquisition of this German newspaper, because what we're just witnessing is the birthplace of the Nazi propaganda.
There you go.
And see, this is why we talk about follow the money, because this small little acquisition, again, 180,000 marks, back then, it was changed to $1. It wasn't that much. However, in the small scheme of things, this was a very major purchase for this little party that will soon be able to mass distribute its own messages, its own beliefs. And this is where later on, somebody by the name of Joseph Goebbels is going to have free reign over this new acquisition.
And Hitler understood this. He was absolutely a student of the power of symbolism and how to manipulate people's emotions for a desired effect.
Absolutely.
Because once you control a man's mind, you don't have to put shackles around his hands and feet. He literally does the work for you. Mm-hmm. He oppresses himself, but we don't want to touch that. So let's just keep traveling down the road.
Right. So the next section, section 4, starts off by saying, a month later, on the 22nd of January, 1921, the First National Congress of the NSDAP was held in Munich. In little more than a year after the party had become a respected force in Bavarian right-wing politics, largely because of Hitler's magnetic personality and obsessive drive. His abilities as an orator, moreover, had turned the original organization from discussion to action. Most of the founders, including Drexler, viewed this transformation with growing concern. While they appreciated the vitality Hitler brought to their lethargic group, they were beginning to wonder if he was worth it all. In a remarkably short period of time, Hitler had become the dominant force, backed by his fervently faithful entourage. These followers, Röhm, the Strassers, Rosenberg, brought with them the undeniable aura of violence. Many of Hitler's private friends and associates were just as repugnant to the old guard, who felt he had too many bohemian comrades. And what genuine socialist would have intimate connections with bankers, industrialists, and socialites such as the Becksteins? The First Congress would seem to have been the logical place for Hitler to stage a revolt and openly seize power that seemed his for the asking. But he restrained himself since only 411 members answered the call to Munich. Nor was the widening split in policy and tactics yet well enough known to rank-and-file members. On the surface, there was unity at the Congress, obvious as it was to insiders that a confrontation was in the offing, and everyone joined in the effort to make Hitler's first appearance 12 days later at the Circus Krone a success. So, now we're starting to see a little bit of concerns amongst the founders, because now the little Hitler puppet that they were utilizing to grow their party, all of a sudden now this guy is the face of the party, which means that he has almost totalitarian control over the direction of the party.
Exactly. And Adolf Hitler was not a self-made man. He was the product of Drexler. Drexler found him. He literally cleaned him up, improved his speech, his presentation, put ideas in his head, and he realized what a powerful speaker he was, how he had the ability to manipulate people's minds and emotions, and he planned to use Hitler as the mouthpiece, as the face of the National Socialist Party, the Nazi Party, to further their goals. But little did they know, Hitler was a little smarter than what they gave him credit for. Mm-hmm. And right underneath their noses, he became the power. He became the power of the party. He was more than just the voice. He became the power of the party. It's very interesting how these things happen.
Exactly. So the next section says, the winter had been a severe one, with food riots rampant throughout Germany. These public disorders were heightened by a demand of the Allied Supreme War Council in Paris for exorbitant war reparations. Germany, close to bankruptcy, was expected to pay 134 billion gold marks. A large segment of the population already lived with little or no heat and went to bed hungry, and the annual payment was believed to hold out a bare subsistence for the workers as well as hardships for the middle class. The spirit of indignation was so general that all the major political parties considered holding a common protest demonstration on the Königsplatz. This was cancelled lest it be broken up by the Reds. On February the 1st, Hitler demanded a final decision. The inappropriately named Action Committee put him off until the following day, and he was informed they, quote, intended, unquote, to hold the meeting in a week. With this, the cord of my patience snapped, and I decided to carry through the protest demonstration alone. That noon, Hitler reserved the Zirkos Krone for the following evening. The manager was a party member, and he reportedly charged Hitler little or nothing, and then dictated copy for a flashy poster. Many of the party faithful had qualms. The circus arena could accommodate an audience of 6,000, and it seemed impossible that even a moderate number could be induced to attend at such a short notice. The posters were not up until Thursday morning. Moreover, a cold rain mixed with snow was falling. Hitler himself was so concerned that he hastily dictated leaflets and sent them off to the printer. That afternoon, 2 hired trucks covered with red festoons, and flying large swastika flags cruised the city. Each vehicle was manned by a score of party members who tossed out the leaflets and shouted slogans. It was the first time that propaganda trucks had been used by non-Marxists in Munich streets, and in some working-class sections, they were greeted with a raised fists and angry shouts. By 7 that night, Hitler got a depressing telephone report from the Zirkus Krone. The auditorium was far from filled. 10 minutes later came a more favorable report, and at 7:40, he was informed that 3/4 of the seats were occupied with long lines queuing at the box office windows. As he entered the building, the same joy seized him as it had a year before at the Hofbräuhaus. Like a giant shell, this hall lay before me, filled with thousands and thousands of people. The ring itself was black with humanity. So again, we are seeing we're seeing a little bit of the propaganda at work with the leaflets and the posters and all. But I think the hidden message that we're seeing here is how when you have people whose lives are already stressful and it's getting worse day by day, being that knight in shining armor, saying the right words and the right messages, is not that hard to get people rowdied up.
And that's when the strong man comes, and that's when people clamor for the strong man.
Mm-hmm.
When the economy has collapsed, when joblessness is sky high, monumentally high, homelessness is high, society is falling apart, infrastructure is crumbling, there is literally no national hope, no future. That's when people clamor for the strong man. This is proven throughout history. So this is not unprecedented. I mean, it is literally nothing new under the sun.
Indeed. Indeed. And like you said, nothing new under the sun. And people still be amazed of today's political arena. It's like, wow, this is just so unprecedented. I've never seen anything like this. And it's like, no. If you read history and you actually become a child of history, this is something that has been repeated thousands upon thousands of times.
Well, see, therein lies the problem right there. People don't read. People don't study history. People have extremely short memories. So to keep it culturally relevant, every time a president is elected, the same things happen. People on one side say that their party, they claim that the president cannot work with the Congress because they're controlled by the opposition party. But yet, when the president of the other party was in office, their followers said the very same thing. When a president is elected, 2 years later there are midterm elections, and that president of that party always loses the control in the House and in the Senate, and it flips to the other party. And the same conversations are had every single time, every single president. So at the end of the day, what I'm really getting to is that people don't pay attention. They don't pay attention. They don't realize what's happening around them. And those that do manipulate the minds and emotions of the masses. It is no different than what happened during the Weimar Republic. It is no different than what we're seeing Hitler and the Nazi Party do, what they did. It is no different throughout all of recorded human history. And it's the very same thing that plays out in every single country. It is literally a cycle that repeats itself, it repeats itself, it repeats itself. So I'm amused at the statements when people say, this is unprecedented. They've never seen this before. They can't believe how can so and so do this. But yet you forgot when the last guy came along and did the same exact thing.
Yes, even though that same guy may have been of a different political association or just the opposition, but if you was to go to this, the same party back years or decades before, they did the exact same thing. May not have been so publicized thanks to today's technology, but they did the same thing.
Do you know, unlike most people, I actually read and I actually do research. If you go back, again, staying culturally relevant, if you go back to political discourse in the country of America since the start of the Industrial Revolution, do you know nothing has changed? Specific topics have changed, but the same thing happens. There's a flip flop, there's a flip flop, there's a flip flop. You have to go all the way back to the 1860s. Every time a president is elected, the next president, unless it's his vice president, is always the opposite party. The country flip flops. It flip flops. So there is no red wave, just like there is never a blue wave. People forget their history.
Right. Right indeed. Well, the next section says future or ruin was his theme, and his heart rejoiced in the conviction that down there before him lay his own future. After the first half, he had the feeling that contact had been established, and the audience was his. Applause began to interrupt him in greater and greater spontaneous outbursts. This was finally succeeded by a remarkable hush, a solemn stillness. Then you could hardly hear more than the breathing of this gigantic multitude, and only when the last word had been spoken did the applause suddenly roar forth to find its release and conclusion in the Dutchland song, sung with the highest fervor. The man who had released this flood of emotion was himself intoxicated, and he remained on the platform for 20 minutes watching the arena. Then, overjoyed, he went out into the sleet to his dingy, unheated little room on the Thayer Strasse. Hitler's performance at the Circus Krone was pilloried, and praised in the Munich press, and he was as pleased by the vituperation as by the approbation. It was not only that he thrived on opposition, but that the violence of the attacks against him showed he was rousing visceral feelings. Despite the turbulence he generated, Hitler was becoming the darling of the respectable nationalist forces, then making Munich their capital and receiving considerable secret support from the police president and his subordinate, who headed the department's political division. These two officials did their best to suppress complaints to the police against party breaches of peace and to protect Nazis when police action could not be forestalled. We recognize that this movement, the National Socialist Party, should not be suppressed. They would testify 3 years later at Hitler's trial. We did not do that, and we refrained deliberately because we saw in the party the seeds of Germany's renewal, because we were convinced from the start that this movement was the one most likely to take root amongst workers infected with the Marxist plague and win them back into the nationalist camp. That is why we held our protecting hands over the National Party and her Hitler. So I'm chuckling because I'm looking at this small development where he's starting to gain political power. When you're getting the police force on your side, that's a sure sign you're gaining political power. And I find it interesting that you have groups of people today here in modern culture that still think that you gain political power just by marches and protesting.
No, that's simply begging. If you don't have political power, you're begging. You can call it protesting, you can call it marching, you can call it whatever you like. Without political power, you are begging. So the thing here about Hitler is that the thing about politics, people don't vote policy. Ironically enough, they don't vote their interest. It's a popularity contest. They vote who makes them feel good, who they like personally. That's what it comes down to. Politicians understand this. It's everyone else who seems to be so lost in the dark about what's really going on when it comes to elections. So Hitler was a man who understood the power of manipulating emotions. In that regard, he's no different than any other politician throughout history, whether you call them a pharaoh, a prince, a chancellor, or a president, or the good Reverend passed the collection plate. It's all about manipulating emotions. That's what it's all about. Because once you, it's easier to control a man's emotions than it is to control his mind. Ironically enough.
Mm-hmm. Oh, boy, this is too funny because when you just said it's easier to control a man's emotions than it is his mind, what people also don't realize, when you start to control a man's emotions, you're only a coin flip away from controlling his mind.
Bingo. There you go. There you go. And for all the talk, people, it never fails to amuse me that for all the talk, people are so emotional.
Mm-hmm.
So when people make claims about how did this person get into power, or how are they voting for this guy, or this person is against this, or how at the end of the day, the person who they're supporting, excuse me, has manipulated their emotions. They have said something that is important to them emotionally.
Yep.
So that right there answers all of your questions. You cannot approach an emotional person with a rational argument. They won't listen to you.
Nope.
And therein lies the core root of the problem.
Oh yeah, that's definitely going deep down the rabbit hole. And salute to the Angry Snowman. Good to see you, sir. But the next section says the Bavarian government also gave him a measure of official recognition. Hitler and the other party leaders were received by Gustav Ritter von Kahr, the right-wing minister-president, who was devoted to the preservation of Bavaria's peculiar status against encroachment by the Weimar regime. Bavaria still retained much of its autonomy, such as its own postal service, and its citizens continued to resent any directives from benighted Northerners. Upon this issue, Hitler and Kahr found common ground, and although the minister-president disagreed with the raging Austrian on many points, he felt the leader of the NSDAP could be useful as a propagandist in his own battle with Weimar. Kahr's friendly reception gave public notice that Hitler was now a political force. Such recognition was welcome since his differences with the old guard in the party were coming to a head. Hitler's transformation into a personality because of his magnetism and crowd appeal indicated that he had not only altered the original purposes of the party, but intended to seize complete control. His adversaries, therefore, took advantage of his absence at Berlin, where he was consolidating ties in that area with conservatives, nationalists, and right-wing radicals, to engineer an alliance with a group of socialists from Augsburg. It seemed innocent, but Hitler realized this was a sly tactical move to weaken his influence. He hastened back home and launched a startling counterattack. On the 11th of July, he announced his resignation from the party. 3 days later, he put his cause before the general membership in an ultimatum. He would not return to the party unless he was made first chairman and given dictatorial powers. I make these demands, he said, not because I am power hungry, but because recent events have more than convinced me that without an iron leadership, the party will within a short time cease to be what it was supposed to be. A National Socialist German Workers' Party, and not a Western association. It was the first manifest appearance of the concept Adolf Hitler had brought from the war. The Führer principle, the leadership principle, absolute obedience to the commander. And might I add, this is the first step in a political move that will eventually put Hitler in the position of the Führer.
First off, the word Führer in German just means leader. That's it. That's all the word means. Leader. So again, the biggest takeaway here, as we have been talking for a long time, Hitler understands how to manipulate emotions. He understands what every person who has ever been a leader of men understands. Speak to their emotions. Don't speak to their minds. You speak to their emotions. That's how you control people. And he understood that brilliantly. And you see and also, what was he exercising? Political power. He's using leverage. These are concepts. I'm going to leave it right there.
Well, let's read on, because the next paragraph talks exactly what you're talking about. So it says Hitler gave the committee 8 days to act, but Drexler was so incensed that he refused to compromise. The situation was exacerbated by distribution of an anonymous pamphlet to party members entitled Adolf Hitler, Traitor. It was a libelous concoction of fact and fancy, but most charges, such as the ones that Hitler called himself the King of Munich and wasted large sums of money on women, and that he was in the pay of the Jews, were so ridiculous that it is difficult to believe the author himself took them seriously. Excuse me. The 8-day deadline passed. Still, Drexler and the committee refused to act. It looked as if Hitler's bluff had failed. But in a last-hour secret session, Eckert persuaded Drexler to compromise. He, in turn, brought around the rest of the executive committee on the grounds that they would still be a minor group, but for Hitler. The latter was presented with a formal, flowery notice granting him the dictatorial power he demanded, and offering to make him chairman in recognition of, quote, your exceptional knowledge, your unusual sacrifice, and honorable accomplishments for the growth of the movement, and your unusual oratorical abilities. A special Congress was convened on the 29th of July to formalize Hitler's selection as new chairman. The meeting was opened by a left-wing Bavarian named Hermann Esser, who had become one of the Führer's closest advisors despite his youth. Widely known as a ladies' man, Hitler described him as, quote, a greyhound you must keep on a leash, unquote. He introduced Hitler, who proceeded to declare that he had fought repeatedly to keep the organization from turning into a tea club. We do not wish to unite with other organizations, he said, but insist that they annex themselves to us so that we can retain the leadership. Anyone who cannot accept this can leave. This went for the Augsburg group and any other out-of-towners. Our movement came from Munich and stays in Munich. In closing, he reaffirmed his friendship for Drexler and said he was prepared to take on the position of chairman. A poll was taken. There were 543 votes for Hitler and only one against. So again, more and more we're starting to see Hitler's persuasive abilities to get what he wants and be able to move this party that's, again, starting to get memberships in the thousands to think his way of thinking.
Charismatic leaders. People follow charismatic leaders because they're charismatic.
Mm-hmm.
Ironically enough, for all the public theater, people don't vote policy. They vote their emotions. They vote who they like. They vote who makes them comfortable. They vote who appeals to their emotions. That's the truth of the matter. Every politician understands this, but I have nothing to say. It's self-explanatory. This story tells itself.
Right. And you know what? I'll even give a prime example from Sigmund Jones' side. So this was back in 2008, the election year. I was pretty much going into my junior year of high school. And I would have to admit, as somebody who did not know much about politics and everything, I knew as far as like how Congress is set up, the executive branch, the judicial branch, and everything. I knew all of that, but I definitely was not a veteran or whatnot in politics. So when you have somebody like Barack Obama who comes along and his message is change. Yes, we can.
Hope.
Yes, hope. I got caught up in it. I was like, you know what? We have yet to have a black president here in the United States. Maybe we do need to have some change. Maybe we do need to have some hope. So, like a blind sheep, my first, because that was also the first year I was able to register to vote, I just blindly voted for Barack Hussein Obama. Not because of my own personal beliefs, not because, so to speak, I done some research and was like, you know what, this guy is for the policies and what that I believe in. No, it was all emotions.
Yep.
And, I'll be the first to admit, I fell for it. Now, come 2012, I'm now in college and I'm a little bit more savvy. I'm now a
Right.
little bit more aware of the emotions behind the politics. Now,
Mm-hmm.
I'm still learning. So it's not like, so to speak, I knew everything that I knew now. But I was now starting to see that, yeah, I got too caught up on the emotional sides of these political race and the elections, and I voted without thinking. So you best believe, came 2012, I was like, you know what? I'm not really into what's going on these days in politics. So I just did not vote. Now, I voted as far as like the local elections because, some propositions affected me more so.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as the whole national elections, I was like, nah, I'm good. I'll hold off.
You know, I don't want to go too. I don't want to go too far in the weeds, but people in America have seemed to totally be unaware of the concept of abstention. But
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to toss that out there as a little breadcrumb. So, New York City recently had general elections for mayor and the 5 borough presidents and the attorney general of each of the 5 boroughs and a few and the city council members. When I got back, because I got back after election day, so I asked my neighbors and I asked several friends and family who they voted for, and I wasn't surprised, but I was somewhat disappointed. People said, "Oh, well, I just voted Democrat all the way down." So, you have no clue who the candidates are other than mayor. There are 5 ballot questions on the general election. Whatever the Democrats voted for, you're just going to follow along like a sheep. And all these candidates for all these general citywide posts, as long as they're a Democrat, you have no clue who they are, what their policies are, what they stand for, who they're a Democrat, you're just going to vote for. And I mention that to say that's how people vote. Now, is that anecdotal? Yes, clearly it is. So go around and talk to your friends, your family, your neighbors. Ask them if they don't do the same exact thing. And that's
Right.
irrespective of left or right. Politicians know this. They understand this. Why do you why do you think they only come around to talk to you when it's election time? Because it's time to play on your emotions for them to get your vote.
Exactly.
And this is what Adolf Hitler understood. This is what all politicians understand. This is what all leaders understand. Most dictators didn't start out that way. But again, I don't want to get too deep into the weeds on this.
Indeed. So the next section says, with Hitler and his armed Bohemians now in absolute control of the NSDAP, all the traditions of the German Workers' Party was dumped overboard, since the elitists were dedicated to the proposition that a new order could not be built on old foundations. There would be no more parliamentary debate and democratic procedures. Henceforth, they would follow the Führer principle. At the same time, Hitler did his best to placate the old guard by making no display of power. He issued no general orders and refrained from enforcing the strict discipline he might have. Instead, he spent the summer consolidating inter-party support in Munich and quietly expanding the rough and ready group which kept order at political meetings into a cohesive, uniform parliamentary unit. It was established early in August under the innocent name of Gymnastic and Sports Division, and, according to a party proclamation, was, quote, intended to serve as a means for bringing our youthful members together into a powerful organization for the purpose of utilizing their strength as an offensive force at the disposal of the movement, unquote. 2 months later, it was given a more descriptive name, I'm going to try to say Sturmabteilung, Storm Detachment. To Hitler, the SA was merely a political weapon to keep order and to march around in uniform to impress the discipline-loving burghers. But its leader, Captain Rahm, regarded it as a genuine armed force, his private army. The nucleus came from the Free Corps units, and one of their early battle songs was revised. Swastika on helmet, armband black, white, red. Storm Detachment Hitler is our name. With the establishment of a private army and the party apparatus under his complete control, Adolf Hitler was now ready to set the NSDAP on a new, more revolutionary course. In the next months, he instigated a series of public provocations. The campaign opened with apparently random acts: the assault of a Jew in the street, illegal display of flags and distribution of pamphlets, and a number of minor public brawls. These petty disturbances of the peace were succeeded on the evening of September 14, 1921, by one of significance. The occasion was a meeting in the Löwenbräukeller of the Bavarian League, a federalist organization which accepted the social program of the Weimar Constitution while deploring its centralism. Its leader, an engineer named Ballerstedt, was preparing to address the crowd just as Hitler, who regarded him as, quote, my most dangerous opponent, unquote, marched in. Scores of SA troops, Saints uniform, had been planted in the audience near the podium, and they leaped to their feet to give Hitler a raucous demonstration. Hundreds of other party adherents planted throughout the audience joined in. Then Hermann Esser climbed on a chair, shouting that Bavaria was in its present low state because of the Jews. This brought a chorus of demands that Ballerstedt gave the floor to Hitler. Someone threw the light switches in an effort to prevent a brawl. It only created tumult. Excuse me. When the light went back on again, the SA flooded onto the stage, engulfing Ballerstedt. After beating him up, the SA group shoved him off the stage into the audience. So right here, the SA, which we're going to definitely do some more analysis of this new private army, we're now starting to see how much of a brawler this group is definitely starting to be under Hitler's control.
The brown shirts were Hitler's original military arm.
Mm-hmm.
So over years, because it's not like I'm giving away the plot to a story. Over the years, Hitler and Rome moved apart a bit. So Hitler wanted to further consolidate power after he became chancellor. So he created the SS under the control of Heinrich Himmler, and eventually he wanted to roll the SD into the SS, but he couldn't because Rome was very popular with the men. So he had him framed, but the point is, Hitler very early on he understood the trappings of power. He understood the trappings of manipulating the populace. He understood the trappings of becoming a dictator, of having power. It takes power. At the end of the day, the first thing you need is political power. The second thing you need physical power, the threat of violence, and the ability to carry it out. And once again, it never ceases to amaze me how every group on the planet understands this except one. But that's as far as I'm going to go with that.
You know what? I was about to say something, but you beat me to the punch, so let me move to the next section. Next it says, at an examination by the police commission investigating the fracas, Hitler expressed no regrets. It's all right, was his dogged comment. We got what we wanted. Ballerstedt did not speak. The matter did not end with an inquiry. Hitler and Esser were both informed they would be tried for violating the peace. The impending trial only inspired violence, which erupted on the evening of the 4th of November. During a Hitler speech at Munich's Hofbräuhaus, by the time he entered the vestibule at 7:45 p.m., the hall was overflowing with more than 800 occupants. The women were told to take seats near the front, as far from the doors as possible. The warning didn't phase Frau Magdalena Squire, a proprietor of a vegetable and fruit shop opposite Hitler's dwelling, and his faithful adherent. I was too excited, really, to be frightened. It was plain there'd be some trouble. Half the people in the place belonged to the Reds. In fact, hostile workers from the Maffei factory, the Isseria meter works, and other shops far outnumbered Hitler's followers. Moreover, the party no longer enjoyed the secret protection of the Bavarian government since Minister-President von Kahr had been forced to resign in favor of a more moderate man. When Hitler saw that the Social Democrats had come early and taken most of the places, he ordered the doors closed. He told the SA bodyguard, there were less than 50 on hand, that this was their chance to show loyalty to the movement, and that not a man of us must leave the hall unless we were carried out dead. They were to attack at the first sign of violence, on the theory that the best defense was a good offense. The answer was a threefold hail that sounded rougher and hoarser than usual. This romanticized account by Hitler was mirrored in the recollections of his followers, who saw him as he undoubtedly saw himself, the pure man of iron will, from the trenches come to lead the fatherland back to honor and glory.
The rise of the strong man.
Yes, sir. And when you have people, keep in mind, their daily lives are being stressed out by the hardships of reparations and a government who was pretty clueless at the time of what to do. All it takes is one man who came from the same background as them to be that strong man.
Again, history is replete with these examples. It does not take a rocket scientist to come to these conclusions. When things are at their worst, society, the economy has collapsed, society itself is collapsing, infrastructure, people can't feed themselves, there are no jobs. This political discord and strife. This leads to the call for a strongman.
Indeed. Indeed. And again, it's just like I'm reading this out loud, and as I'm reading this, I'm saying to myself, huh. I can think of at least the previous three presidents who, from whatever little background, their influence, at least from an oratory perspective, is so much similar to how Hitler is showing in this biography.
That's why I said, in my opinion, just my opinion, and a blanket will keep you warm at night. In my opinion, America is walking the same path as the Weimar Republic. Didn't did not the Congress just approve a landmark infrastructure bill?
Oh, yes. Yes, they did. And not only that, even though it was a house that was pretty populated by the left side, you even had a few of the right wingers who helped to pass this infrastructure bill.
Yeah, but see, here's the thing. Coming back to what I was saying, I I ignore all discussions of left wing or right wing because if you study the history, this always happens.
Mm-hmm.
These people live together. They work together. What's to make you think that they're enemies of one another? At the end of the day, they are puppets to the wealthy elite. Your
Right.
national your national anthem tells you, I pledge allegiance to the flag, blah 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 blah, and to the republic for
Mm-hmm.
which it stands.
Mm-hmm.
America is a republic. They even tell you, you're taught in school. The quote unquote founding fathers framed it, they copied it off of the Roman Empire,
Mm-hmm.
which was a republic. Wealthy elite. How did you become a member of the Roman Senate? You were wealthy. That's it. Period.
Mm-hmm.
No one
Yep.
was elected. There were no free and fair elections. You were wealthy. You had money. You were in the Roman Senate.
Ooh, but then, Mr. Logic Finest, that means that if you wanted to really have influence and change people's minds, that also means you had to become part of the elites.
Yeah, but see, that requires elevation of one's thinking to be able to wrap your head around those concepts. And rational thinking is in very short supply. So,
Oh, yes.
hence why people are like dogs chasing their tail. Left wing, right wing, left wing, right wing, liberal, conservative, liberal, conservative. My friend, liberal, conservative literally should not be your conversation. Your focus should be how can I make the best social and financial choices for myself, understanding that everything is my interests. Don't vote party, you vote your interests.
Mm-hmm.
But again, that requires such a high degree of elevation of thinking, you're just going to keep banging your head up against the wall trying to. You can lead the human to rational thinking, but you can't do the thinking for them.
Very true. And in the vein of that saying, there's an old saying that says, I can walk you to the brink of flesh-flowing water, but I can't drink it for you.
There you go.
All right. So to start wrapping this up, next it says, as Hitler started towards the speaker's platform, workers shouted threats. Hitler ignored them and pushed forward. Hermann Esser was now standing on the front table, calling the meeting to order. He jumped down, and Hitler took his place. At first, there were boos, but even those who had come to jeer listened to his arguments. Excuse me. And he was able to talk for more than an hour without interruption. But his opponents were only biding their time as they drowned numerous mugs of beer, stowing the empty ones under the tables for ammunition. All at once, someone interrupted Hitler, and he shouted a retort. There were isolated angry shouts throughout the room. A man jumped on his chair and yelled, Freiheit! Freedom. A beer stein hurtled at Hitler's head. Then half a dozen more. Duck down, the young monitors up front shouted to the women. Frau Squire obeyed. One heard nothing but yells, crashing beer mugs, stamping and struggling, the overturning of heavy oaken tables, and the smashing of wooden chairs. A regular battle raged in the room. Curious, she looked up to see Hitler still standing atop a table, despite the barrage of heavy mugs flying past his head. The outnumbered SA fought so ferociously that within half an hour, the enemy had been driven down the stairs. It looked as if a shell had exploded in the hall, demolishing chairs, tables, and beer mugs. Finally, above the din came the voice of Hermann Esser. The meeting goes on. The speaker has the floor. Hitler resumed his speech even as his stormtroopers were bandaged or carried out of the room. He finished to an outburst of applause. Moments before, an excited police officer entered and shouted, "The meeting is dismissed."
You know, does this not remind you of the scene from the film Malcolm X? Get your hand out of my pocket. Where do you think Spike Lee came up with that idea? What? Anyway, please continue.
Oh no. And not only that, I mean, you look at you can look at TV or your phone, whichever technology you have, and you look at some of these videos of these political wings, left or right, and you see the exact same energy. You see people who are just enthralled in their emotions at the opposition. And as you rightfully pointed out, sir, if I was a psychologist, especially in regards of Pavlov's dog,
Mm-hmm.
this would be a psychologist's dream of watching people's emotions just be thrown out of proportions just because somebody has a difference of opinion.
Politicians understand this. That's why politicians understand this full well. Again, ironically, it is easier to control a man's emotions than it is to control his mind. Because once you control his emotions, for the vast majority of human beings, you automatically control his mind. Because emotions, we unfortunately are creatures of emotion. We are beings of emotion. So for most people, if you can control that person's emotions, you control that person. Politicians understand this. That's why they seek to control your emotions. Bernays understood that from his uncle Sigmund Freud's work. Control a person's emotions and you will get them to spend their hard-earned money on things that they don't need. That's what advertising is, to get you to pay money that you don't have for things that you don't need, to convince you that you need them. Why? By manipulating your emotions to get you to think that you're thinking when in reality you are reacting. So it never ceases to amaze me when I see people exhibiting binary thinking, and they get so upset and bent out of shape when I try to explain to them and show them how they are exhibiting binary thinking,
Mm-hmm.
and yet they double down on the binary thinking and then level personal attacks, insults, and profanity. So again, I've had to adopt the understanding: never correct a fool because he will hate you. Instead, correct a wise man because he will appreciate you.
Absolutely. And this is why, and I'm speaking for myself, but I know, good sir, you can definitely relate to this. That's why when it comes to politics and even religion, because to me, they work in the same vein, I have learned over the years to take a neutral position.
Mm.
And the reason why I've learned, especially in today's climate, to take a neutral position,
Mm.
because when one takes sides, because see, there's this old trope of you have to pick a side. There is no in between in everything. You
More
have to take
binary
sides.
thinking.
Exactly. And to me, being a neutral person actually puts you in a more elevated position.
Yes, it
And the
does.
reason I say that is because by being able to look at both sides and not have any dog in the fight, you can easily see what's going on, see the root cause, and it's much easier to walk away.
There you go. See, here's the thing, right? Once you pick a team, once you choose a side, you have now defined yourself, and now by doing so, you've put yourself into a box. So what does that mean? I know who and what you are. I know what you're thinking. I know how you're thinking. I know what you're going to think and say and do before you even do it. So what does
Right,
that mean? I now control you.
right.
And because of the fact that I control your emotions, you can't even see that I'm controlling you. And no matter how much someone like Paulie comes along and tells you that, hey, guy, you're being you're being controlled. You won't listen to a word I say because why? You're operating over pure emotion. So
Exactly.
this is why you have to control your emotions and you have to think rationally.
Right.
But since that is in very short supply, we we see the results that we see because people think with their emotions. They're not thinking rationally, and it amuses me to no end to watch people talk about how they're a deep thinker, they're a rational thinker. And it's like, well, I hear what you're saying, but yet all you're doing is hitting me with pure emotion and insults and profanity and personal attacks and more emotion. So, where is your rational thinking? You can barely put two sentences together. You lack the ability to put forth a logical, rational, coherent argument. But yet, you're telling me you're a thinker when you're acting on pure emotion. Okay, I hear you. Good luck with that.
See, my thing is this, sir, and I'm pretty sure you would also agree with me on this because we both think alike. See, a person who is who has elevated thinking and is able to especially think on a more esoteric level, they have a mindset of, hey, I have my opinions, but unless you ask me of my opinions, I am of the intuition that I am not going to push my beliefs on you. Therefore, a person who's truly higher levels of thinking are not going to constantly be on a biased level. They're not going to constantly try to force people to think the way that they, in their minds, should be thinking. To me, it's just this belief of, okay, I have my thoughts, I have my beliefs, and if anybody asks me about them, sure, I will share them, no problem. But you will never catch me forcing my beliefs, forcing my opinions on an individual just to prove a point. To me, if a person says, Sigma Jones, you just don't care. You such and such. I'm just like, you know what? You can believe what you want to believe. I'm not going to force your mind. I'm not going to change your way of thinking by facts. You your own person. You want to believe what you want to believe. That shows the true essence of a person who can think on a higher plane of thinking, which me and you both agree, is just so far and few.
You know, um, you have some people, and they like to say, "I'm the guy. I'm the alpha male. I'm the top dog. I'm the big dog. I
Oh
don't
boy.
follow the pack. I'm the leader of the pack." But see, here's the thing, right? You're still a member of the pack.
Mm-hmm.
So the leader of sheep is still himself a sheep because you find your self worth and your value and your comfort and your validation
Mm-hmm.
from the other sheep. Everything for you is external. So you may be leading the sheep, but you're like, okay, sheep, come on, gather around me, all follow in line with me, follow around me, keep me comfortable while I'm leading you, sheep, while I'm leading us, I'm in front. But you're still a part of the pack. You're still suffering from that hive mind mentality of binary thinking. You you yourself are a sheep. You are the sheep in front, but you are still a sheep, part of the group. You seek
Mm-hmm.
total external validation for everything and every aspect of your life. A true independent thinker walks alone. He leads no one. He
Mm-hmm.
he collaborates with those of like mind who also share common goals when necessary, and then when those goals have been met, they take leave of one another and go their separate ways until
Mm-hmm.
those goals align once again and they come back together to again further their mutually beneficial goals. And they once again go their separate ways. But all throughout, he remains a true independent thinker, a rugged individualist. A true individualist is always an independent thinker. He takes no sides. He chooses no teams. And there is a vast, stark difference between collaborating with others of similar goals and the binary thinking of you have to choose a side, you have to have a team. Because at the end of the day, what you're really saying is you are a crab, you are a sheep, you are a sheep, you are part of the group, and you're part of the group, and anyone who's not part of the group, oh well, there's somebody different. They don't want to be part of the group. So what's wrong with them? I'm part of the group. What? I'm not good? What the group? What we aren't good enough for you? That's what you're really saying. But way off the rails, way deep into the weeds, but it it is what it is. One has to have the ability to elevate their thinking and think independently, because if not, you are nothing but a human Pavlov experiment.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, that's what most people on this planet are. The human Pavlov experiments. So it is what it is.
Absolutely. And I before we end this stream and everything, I definitely would like to throw an extra bone on that lovely argument. Excuse me. Especially when I hear some of these knuckleheads always talking about, well, you gotta be alpha, you gotta be beta. I simply have to ask them this question. If you have to be alpha or beta, Why is it then that you're asking other groups of people to validate your alpha or to
Hey, hey,
validate your beta?
you better be careful before the policy monster comes and gets you.
Well, with that said, then let's go ahead and wrap this up. So we just finished off the sections 4 and 5, or excuse me, sections 3, 4, and we'll start 5 on the next section and all. But my co-host Logic Finest, what are your final thoughts so far on the segments we just finished off with Hitler gaining more power and more influence, and pretty much the small influence of his party starting to be widespread?
The takeaway here should not be Adolf Hitler. The takeaway should not be direct correlations between America and the Weimar Republic. Even though I feel they're walking down the same path, the lesson should be understand understand the cycle that has been repeated. Once you understand the underlying themes, then you start to see the patterns and you start to see how they repeat themselves. Hitler was a politician. He was a leader. He became a dictator. He understood the power of symbolism, of words, of political power, and physical power with the threat of violence that can be backed up at any given moment. He understood these things, and he understood the value and the power of manipulating people's emotions in order to control them. Once you control a man's emotions, you control his mind. You don't have to put a gun to his head or put shackles on his hand and his feet. He oppresses himself. And that has nothing to do with skin color or ethnicity. That is a part of the human condition. Because again, when you keep putting yourself into these teams and dividing yourself and exhibiting the binary thinking, the person who's controlling you, they know exactly what you're going to say, what you're going to do, and how you're going to think before you do. Why? Because they're controlling your emotions. They're already controlling every aspect of your life. But as we well know, it is easier to fool a man than it is to convince him that he has in fact been fooled.
Absolutely. And I'm just gonna be honest. The more we do these type of streams, because keep in mind, I mean, we're barely scratching the surface right now with Adolf Hitler, and this is just in the 1920s. Wait till we get into the 30s when they're at full power, going right before into World War II. Then keep in mind, we still got other characters we got to talk about, like Franklin Delano Roosevelt, um, names escape me, Benito Mussolini, the Razor himself, Hideki Tojo. We have the Bulldog over in England, Mister. I mean, these are characters we we're getting into human psychology.
You know,
And
I don't, forgive me for cutting you off. I don't want to dance around this. Hitler understood the value of political power. When Strasser confronted him, he said, no, no, no. The most important thing is power. It's all about power. He understood that. If you don't have political power, you're begging. You can call it protesting. You can call it demands. You can call it being owed something. You can come up with 10,000 different moral and emotional terms. At the end of the day, if you don't have political power, you are begging. If you look at any group of people that have gotten anything, they did it through political power, or they did it through physical and military power. Either or. And if you have both, well then the stakes in the game is played all together differently. But again, if you don't have political power, you are begging. So whatever your political structure may be, whether it be a two-party system or a parliamentary system, which is basically a multi-party system, If you as a group do not have political power, you have nothing. You are begging. Until you can wrap your head around that simple concept, you will remain in the position where you are with nothing. And here's a newsflash. Every group on this planet, except one, understands this.
That's right. And to put the cherry on top of that, this is another thing that I will constantly remind the audience until. See, I don't mind repeating myself because repetition is mother skills. Once you actually start getting in the head, that's when everything else will start to become of rationalization. But the thing is this: the elites practice classism.
Yes, they do.
Everybody else practice racism,
That's
sexism, Marxism. Need I say more?
people cannot wrap their heads around that. The cognitive dissonance is so powerful. I can hear the keyboards lit on fire, writing emails complaining about what both of us have just said.
Well, they could continue to send on the emails, but hey, until you can scientifically prove that the elites practice something else, I'm sorry, history is on my side. All right, excuse me, history is on our side.
Well, again, history doesn't take sides. It is that it is.
Mm-hmm. That's true. That's true. But I'm just saying our
No,
evidence.
right. Yes, yes.
Our
No.
evidence has been backed up by history. So unless human psychology changes overnight,
Yeah.
hey, see what people are doing, especially when it comes to classism, and you will see why. As my co-host just pointed out, you get power through two means. You either get it by force, or you get it by actions.
Political actions, right? So you can excuse me. You either get political power or you get military power. Now,
Mm-hmm.
what gives you political power? Financial power is what gives you political power.
Mm-hmm.
People, again, these are things people, they have these things twisted up, completely twisted up. Money gives you political power. Weapons give you military power. That's
Mm-hmm.
something completely different. But it is money that grants you political power. So, what do I always say? Follow the money. When you follow drugs, you're going to end up with drug dealers. When you follow the money, there's no telling where you're going to end up. But I'll tell you where you will end up if you follow the money: political power, because that's where it comes from. Money. If you do not have political power, then you have to resort to physical power if there is a system in place that you want to change. Because there are only two ways to change a system. You have to change it from the inside out, or if you have the military power, then you destroy it and replace it with your system. But if you don't have the military power and you have no political power, why would anyone take you seriously? But you know what? I digress.
Indeed. Well, with that said, we'd like to thank the audience for tuning in to this episode of The War Room. Definitely feel free to rewind and watch the replay or the previous episodes of The War Room. There definitely will be more coming down the pipe. But with that said, I am Admiral Sigma Jones. This is my co-host, Logic's Finest. We thank you all for tuning in. Until next time.
Good night.